For our next video, we're going to be talking about the thyroid. Most people, when they have a thyroid problem, it's a hypothyroid issue, but there are people that have hyperthyroid problems as well. So we're going to kind of go over both of those. And we're going to talk about really why you need to have your full thyroid panel done when you go to the doctor if you suspect you have a thyroid issue. So we have a prop here today. We got a little chart here that shows you a flow chart of how the thyroid works. Okay, your thyroid metabolism starts in the brain in the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus will send thyroid releasing hormone or TRH to the pituitary gland, and the pituitary gland sends a signal down to the thyroid. Now, when you think about the thyroid, just think it's a little factory, and the components that it makes are T4 and T3. So inside the factory, there are workers. Workers are called TPO, stands for thyroid peroxidase. Those are the things that put the thyroid hormone together. You also have iodine in there, and you have some proteins called thyroglobulins, and they make up the components of T4 and T3. Now, the big thing you got to understand here is that at the thyroid, all of the T4 is made, but only 7% of the T3 is converted in the thyroid. T3 is the active form of thyroid hormone. T4 is the inactive. Now, the next step is that the remaining 93% has to get down to the liver, okay? And it does that by going on to a protein transport called the thyroid binding globulin. So at this point, it's still inactive. 93% goes down to the liver. In the liver, 60% of that is converted from T4 to T3. 20% goes to the reverse T3, which is like the feedback loop that goes back up to the brain to tell the brain we either need more or less T4. And another 20% is converted into these cofactors, which is still inactive, but then it goes down to the gut. And at the gut, the remaining 20% is converted from T4 to T3 to be active. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about some of the things that can cause this not to work. Now, traditional medical or even endocrinologists, they measure the TSH. If your TSH is high, then you're considered hypothyroid. If your TSH is low, you're considered hyperthyroid or Graves. So that's the only thing they traditionally measure, okay? Now, there's a bunch of other stuff going on here, all right? Now, if you have a problem with your brain, like decreased brain function from inflammation or serotonin deficiencies or imbalances, dopamine, which are neurotransmitters, then that's not going to work right. So right from the get-go, your thyroid metabolism gets thrown off, okay? The pituitary can have a role in having an upset thyroid by, you can have a pituitary tumor or something like that, but that's very rare. Now, at the thyroid itself, we can have a bunch of problems. We can have receptor antibodies, which means that this TSH can't dock in there to tell the thyroid to make more or less of the T4 and T3. We could have TPO antibodies, all right? We could have a deficiency in iodine, and we can have receptor antibodies, which is going to mess this whole thing up, okay? But again, that's only really covering about 7% of the full thyroid, okay? Now, we can have a problem with the transport, okay? We can have thyroid binding globulin antibodies, all right? Now, from here down, we really want to focus on the receptors, okay? Every cell in the human body has thyroid receptors on it, okay? If you have a problem up here, then it's probably something to do with the regular metabolism that's going on, but from here down, if you have an issue, it's usually a receptor-based problem, okay? It doesn't necessarily have to be, but that's what the case is, all right? Now, at the liver, okay, you can have a bunch of stuff going on there. The job of the liver is to detox, phase 1, phase 2 detox, and methylation and all that kind of stuff. So one of the things that happens here is 60% of your T4 is converted to T3. So if you have blood sugar imbalances, anemia, immune issues, that type of thing, then you're going to be outside of that 60% conversion. Okay, so the majority of the conversion from T4 inactive to T3 active takes place in the liver. So we got a bunch of stuff that can happen there. Also, our feedback loop starts to come from the liver there as well. And then we come down to the gut. Now in the gut, there's a lot of things that can go on. You can have leaky gut, you can have parasites, you can have colon issues or Crohn's or anything like that to do with gut, and that's going to mean that about 20% of your thyroid hormone can't be converted correctly. So when you really look at the big picture here, when you do when you want to check the thyroid out, you really need to do a full thyroid panel, blood panel. The TSH only gives us a little picture into what's going on. Now, if you take a blood test and your TSH is high, and you generally be put on a medication, Synthroid or levothyroxine, which is basically just T4. All right, that's going to signal that to the body like, hey, I got enough T4, don't worry about it, which means that the brain's going to tell the TSH to go down, which is what the desired result is. But a lot of people will do this, and then they get stuck feeling just as bad or worse than they were before they started taking the medication. So they go back to the doctor, they get more, they're up the dosage, and they might feel good for another 3 or 4 weeks, and then it's just this like back and forth type situation. Now that's a problem because the majority of the thyroid metabolism or conversion takes place away from the thyroid, and they're only addressing that 7%. They're doing all the T4, but that 7% of conversion, we really need to make sure that we're getting the T3. So I encourage you to, if you think you have a thyroid problem, I encourage you to talk to your doctor about having a full thyroid panel. I know it's hard, a lot of doctors won't do that, I don't know why. Probably because the treatment's going to be the same if they do a full panel or if they just do the TSH. So this is a little picture of a full thyroid panel. So we have TSH, total T4, total T3, free T4, free thyroxine index, free T3, T3 uptake, reverse T3, thyroid binding globulin antibody, TPO antibody, and anti-thyroid globulin antibody. So we're looking for everything on here. Okay, we're looking to see if we can convert. Okay, or if we have enough T4, are we getting enough T3? If we aren't, then there's a problem in the conversion factor. And again, the majority of that takes place in the liver. So if you got a liver problem, if you got blood sugar imbalances, then most likely that's where your problem's coming from. Okay, if you got a lot of stress in your life, and who doesn't, then that's an adrenal issue, and that's going to be another thing you want to look at. Too much cortisol will affect the conversion in the gut and in the brain. Okay, so you really need to have this full panel in place so you can understand really the whole mechanism of what's going on. Just doing a TSH and maybe a free T4 because they want to appease you because you asked for it is not going to get you anywhere. You're just going to be stuck into a situation where you're just going to feel like crap over and over again. And then eventually you end up getting Hashimoto's, which is basically autoimmune thyroid. Okay? And then once you get one autoimmunity, you get 2, 3, and 4. So, and that's a nice segue right into our next video. Our next video is going to be on autoimmunities and how we can help people that have autoimmune conditions. So until next time, good health.